This is Carolina Business Review. Major support provided by Colonial Life, providing benefits to employees to help them protect their families, their finances, and their futures. High Point University, the premier life skills university focused on preparing students for the world as it is going to be. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Welcome to Carolina Business Review. We're grateful that you've chosen to spend some time with us today to learn more about what's going on in both North and South Carolina. I'm Ullrich, filling in for Chris William, and you're watching the longest running and most widely watched program on Carolina business, policy, and public affairs, seen in North and South Carolina for over 3 decades. Thank you for your support. Today we're going to compare and contrast urban and rural spaces a bit. We all know that the urban areas in both North and South Carolina are growing, but what about the more rural spots? Well, we have a great opportunity to learn more about that today from AgSouth Farm Credit CEO Vance Dalton. The conversation starts now.
Major funding also by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association, and Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation on which our communities improve and grow. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Carl Blackstone from the Greater Columbia Chamber of Commerce, Vicki Lee Parker High of the North Carolina Sustainable Business Council, and special guest Vance C. Dalton Jr., President and CEO of AgSouth Farm Credit.
Hey, Vicki Lee and Carl, so glad to have you here. Welcome back to the show. I know you've both been on several times. Really happy to have you here.
Good to be back.
Yeah.
It's good to be with both of y'all.
So I want to spend the beginning part of today talking about a bit more about the urban parts of North and South Carolina, and then when Vance joins us later, maybe shift to a conversation about rural. So Vicki Lee, I want to start with you. I mean, North Carolina continues to see very strong growth from a macro point of view. Unemployment rates right now, back in December, were about 3.5%. But in rural spots, I mean, urban spots like Raleigh, it's more like 2.9% or even lower. So really tight labor market. So I'm curious, what are you seeing the state of North Carolina do to kind of address the need for workers?
Well, as you know, that has been an ongoing conversation, getting those skilled workers in there, and now to see this labor market tighten, it comes up in every conversation. But there was a recent announcement from the Commerce Department, because they're hearing the businesses, and so they just launched a program where they invested nearly $500,000 to create 14 workforce boards that are going to be strategically placed across the state, so to represent majority of the counties. And what those boards are going to do is actually partner with organizations like the North Carolina Sustainable Business Council and other groups to understand what those work needs are, so that they can really pinpoint where we need to work, what areas and skills that need to be developed. And so I really applaud them, because I think this is the kind of effort where they get down on the ground, where they actually are working with businesses and business organizations to really identify what's needed, where the gaps are. So, they're hearing it. They see it's an issue. This program, I'm hoping, will help to make a difference to help find those skilled workers.
That's great. So in South Carolina, are you seeing other initiatives that are making a difference?
Absolutely, out of necessity, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we've seen from July 2022 to July 2023, South Carolina per capita was the fastest growing state. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing unbelievable growth mainly in the urban markets. Mm-hmm. These rural markets are important because, one, the land is still cheaper. You have some challenges as it relates to workforce, but that's an opportunity as well. So I think you're going to see our state legislature, they're looking at ways to bridge that gap.
Right.
And one of the biggest issues we have, and especially in the rural markets, is childcare.
Right.
And we're looking at how do we fund childcare, especially from a workforce standpoint. Right. How do we bring moms, single moms that have to deal with childcare all the time? Those are important. And looking at tax credits for those companies or vouchers for those companies. Right. We got to start thinking differently, because the growth is not going to be in the urban markets for long. I mean, they're parts of South Carolina, they're just tapped out.
Right. So let's talk about that a little bit. So the growth has really just been incredible. I mean, if you look, I think since COVID hit in Raleigh, employment growth is like almost 13%. Just really outrageous growth in some ways.
Yes.
Does it feel sustainable? I mean, it seems like what you're saying, Carl, is that it doesn't feel sustainable.
I mean, we're riding that wave, and I think that from the manufacturing side, you look at the growth that we've seen, $10, $11 billion worth of capital investment in our state the last few years. Not all has gone into urban markets. Some have gone into rural. We're seeing growth in Chester along this. Now, they are around interstates, right? That is the key, is transportation infrastructure. But the fact that those dollars are looking elsewhere, we've got to also look at long-term incentives. How do we incentivize companies not to look in the urban markets, but to encourage them to look outside of the market? And I think North Carolina's very similar in that regard.
Yes, it is. I've seen growth. I saw a map recently where there was really no infrastructure, but yet there was a major announcement in this area. And so they're working with the funding that's coming down through the federal government and through the federal funding to build out the infrastructure. So they're even thinking that far in advance, where they're seeing where it's just land, how can we connect it somehow, to the grid. So we're starting to see that people are thinking forward. They're realizing, like he said, we are starting to tap out. Raleigh is but what it is. It can only grow for so much in that particular square land, but they're looking at ways that they can move beyond, and they're seeing that.
But I think we also have to look at infrastructure in the larger scale. Not only is it roads, not only is it energy, where's natural gas? I just recently learned that not every county has natural gas.
Right.
Can we find a way to access that, or can we broaden the ability to spread natural gas to these rural areas? That could actually be a huge economic boom to some of these rural areas. But we have to start thinking long term, because again, the growth around Charleston and Greenville, Raleigh, Charlotte, can't continue at the rate we have.
So let's talk about Columbia specifically for a minute. I spent a lot of time in both North and South Carolina, and Columbia has not seen the growth that those other markets that you just listed has seen. And whenever I ask people in Columbia why, they bring up that it's a government town, big university, state capital, but so is Raleigh, so is Austin, Texas, right?
So simple answers for that, but it's really deeper than that, right? It's poor leadership over the last 20, 30 years. I mean, our taxes are extremely high. And if you look at the market, we're out of whack as it relates to commercial taxes. We're one of the highest in the country. And so that actually is a wet blanket as you're looking at development. That's why others have gone to other places that are cheaper. Now, we have, what's going to help us long term is we have talent. We have 6 colleges, and that's what's been the driver of Raleigh and Charlotte. Now that we have a university, we've got to market different what we've been doing, but we can't continue to be very high on taxes and expect businesses to come, because if it doesn't work on a pro forma, it's not going to work.
Is that a city issue, county issue, state issue, all of the above?
A little bit of all of the above. Primarily in our area, it's countywide.
Okay, interesting, really interesting. So Vicki Lee, let me ask you a bit about small businesses. So much of what we've kind of been talking about so far is kind of these more larger announcements, these companies, large companies that are coming, and big sites that need infrastructure. But I know Goldman Sachs just came out with some information that showed that 75% of small businesses actually have a really positive outlook on the financial side of their business going into 2024. What's driving that? What's driving the positive sentiment?
That was very strong, a very strong number. And there are a couple of things. I mean, I know even though you hear about inflation and you hear about that, but what's also happening, we don't have the same factors that we typically would have when we think inflation, because we have consumer spending, which has still remained very strong, and we have wage growth, which has been occurring, and that has remained pretty steady. So that has still been fueling the economy for small businesses. So they're banking on that to continue. And there's also, I feel, some optimism with the small businesses that the rates might start to creep down, which will loosen up and free up some capital that they need. So I think they're looking, it's an election year as well, so they're looking that things might loosen loosen up and really kind of the winds will kind of go their way. So I think that 75% optimism is pretty strong. And I think also in that survey, they also mentioned that over half said they're going to be hiring, and 62% said they anticipate having a profit in 2024. Wow. So real strong optimism coming from the small business sector.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Are you hearing the same thing from the smaller businesses in your area?
I mean, I think we're fortunate in the Sun Belt that we are seeing such growth, and the talk of the market softening, it's all relative, right? I mean, they're busy. They may not be as busy as they were maybe a year ago, but they say, we needed to slow down a little bit.
Right.
So I don't think it's, I think anticipating a little bit of a market correction is good, but demand is great. And I mean, we're seeing, just like North Carolina, the amount of new people moving in. Our issue is we've got such a high number of retirees coming in.
Yes.
Which is, they want services and they need people, but they not want to work.
Right.
So we've got to figure out that challenge, and so I think skilling some folks, reshifting what the educational services look like.
Right.
But we've got to figure out those jobs, because the hospitality retail is so big for us, and those jobs are still hard to find.
No doubt about it. Well, let's pause right here for now, and let's see who's coming up in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll bring on our special guest.
Right.
We have Nito Cabane that'll be joining us, president of High Point University, and also CEO of Santee Cooper. So now it's time to welcome our special guest, Vance Dalton. We're so happy to have you here today. He's president and CEO of AgSouth Farm Credit. Thanks for being with us.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and welcome to the conversation. We want to shift a bit to conversation about rural, because that's most of who you serve. And before we get started, if you just could, in a quick 30-second answer, tell us about what you guys do. What markets do you serve?
Sure. So AgSouth Farm Credit is a ag lending cooperative. We make loans for capital loans to farmers in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. We also make homes in the rural markets, home loans in the rural markets.
Awesome, fantastic. So the first thing I want to talk about, we've been talking more about the urban parts of the Carolinas, but let's shift to rural. I've spent a lot of time in the past couple weeks actually in rural eastern North Carolina and South Carolina. And while there are parts of the state that are growing really rapidly, there are also a lot of counties that are continuing to lose population and employment. What do you see in your work, and do you think there are things that can be done to really turn that around?
Yeah, I think we see those same trends in the rural parts of the states. Certainly, we have young people that are leaving, and they're not coming back all the time to stay, because they're not getting the same level of services. They've not got the same arts and entertainment things to see and enjoy. So I do think that can be turned around if we can find ways to revitalize those areas, make it attractive for folks, particularly our young folks, to come back and see they can make a life in those rural areas and still have access to those amenities that they enjoyed when they left home to go to college.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about this urban development and how it is creeping out into the more rural spaces. What does this mean for farmland? And I'm curious about this in terms of development, but also if you could comment on the use of solar.
Yeah.
Farmland for solar too.
Yeah, so, well, I think there was a recent study done by American Farmland Trust, and North Carolina in particular ranks second in the nation for the potential of loss of farmland between now and 2040.
Wow.
We stand to lose in North Carolina as much as 1.5 to 1.6 million acres of 8 million acres total.
Goodness.
So that's a huge dramatic effect. And it's primarily centered around the counties around Charlotte and Raleigh, which is no surprise. Those are the ones we're going to see the most loss. So we have all these folks that are moving into the states, both North and South Carolina, and we've got to feed them, and we've got to find ways to accommodate those folks, but they're taking the farmland away. So it certainly is a situation where if we don't do something to preserve some farmland in our states through some type of programs, farmland preservation programs, we're going to be faced with a big deal for farmers when they start losing and can't farm. So that particular issue is certainly top of mind for a lot of farmers, and it makes also the farmland so expensive.
Right.
It's hard to farm it when the prices of being developed all around you are driving the prices high. So there's threats there. There is a lot of solar moving in. has been quite a bit of solars, but that's also taking farmland out of production.
Absolutely. That's what I was curious about.
And so it's a way possibly for an operation to diversify, maybe diversify their income stream, maybe offset some risk that they experience in the ag, but it absolutely is taking away farmland.
Absolutely. Vicki, do you have a question?
Well, I was going to talk to you about the solar as well, because I mean, in North Carolina, we've just in 2023 we saw like several large announcements of solar farms with multiple $1-million investments, and you know, we're talking 700 acres I think that went into Nash, and Pitt County recently had an announcement, and that was over 700 acres, and then we just had one in October. So one of the things I was wondering is this what we're going to continue to see? And I know there are some economists who say, well, it's a great initial investment, but it's unlike other development where you're creating more jobs and an ecosystem around it. That I don't know if that's occurring when we see these big investments like that. And is that prohibiting other development that typically goes with that type of investment?
Yeah, I think that's the key, is the solar, you can put the infrastructure in place and it provides some income stream to the farmer, but it doesn't create jobs. There's not a lot of upkeep that has to be done, and a lot of that can be done even with animals if you need to. So I don't think that from an economic development perspective, bringing solar in is adding a lot to the communities. Other than certainly it adds energy to our grid. I'm sure that's helpful to the folks that need it there. But from a farmer's perspective, you know, the loss of that farmland, I think long-term concerns me more on a long-term basis.
Right, really interesting. And are there communities that have figured out ways to try to stop that, or to at least maybe give farmers an incentive to not go that route? Because financially, sometimes I understand it could make more sense for them to do that.
I'm not aware of anywhere that they've intentionally tried to stop it from happening, but I think the farmers that I know that we've worked with that have installed those in their operations are pretty mindful of it's just a piece of what we do, and they're limiting to that so that it offsets some risk, it brings some income in, but it doesn't you know, disrupt the total farming operation that they can operate under.
So I did want to ask you too about climate change and extreme weather. I was out in Wayne County, North Carolina earlier last week actually, and I was asking there about economic development, and it was really interesting because when I was asking people about it, multiple times floods came up. And multiple people, I was just asking people that worked in the community, and multiple times people said, well, you know, we had multiple 100-year floods in a 5-year period, and when that happened, it forced some businesses and people out. And so we hear more and more about these climate effects. What are you guys seeing? How are you planning for that? How are you trying to mitigate those impacts?
Yeah, it continues to be a rising issue, particularly in the eastern parts of both North and South Carolina. And the reality, though, is it's an issue when it floods down there, but that's not where often it originates. That's not where the problem originates. It's a statewide issue. It's, you know, if it's flooding in Wayne County, that water's coming either from the coast or possibly from, you know, metropolitan areas in Raleigh. So I think it's important that we tackle that issue as a statewide issue and not let it be limited to a geographic area, because that's not where the problem originates. So it's important that we look at that in a holistic view. From a farming perspective, it's really important for us to have, and our farmers to have, access to good crop insurance program. There's so much risk. You know, farming is such a capital invested opportunity there. You've got to have something to mitigate your risk. Without crop insurance, you know, that farmer, you know, can't make money if something like that happens. You know, they're so capital intensive, a big flood like that could totally wipe the business out.
Absolutely.
So we need a strong crop insurance program by the federal government to help those farmers mitigate that risk and plan for their future.
Carl, you have a question?
Sure, thanks. Jumping a little bit to workforce. If I talk to any employer in my area, much like real estate, it's location, location, location. If I talk to an employer, it's all about workforce, workforce, workforce. Farming, one of the oldest professions known, what does tomorrow's workforce look like within the ag community? Obviously, it's driven a lot these days by technology, but what do you look for, what do you see down the line as far as how do you recruit new farmers?
Well, that's a huge challenge for agriculture in general, and that's one reason that we invest a lot into young people. If we put a lot of investment in our young people, even at the high school age, 4-H and FFA programs, then we do work all through the college years to try and invest in those folks to encourage them that say you can have a life in agriculture and you can live a great life. Maybe you don't get rich, but you have a wonderful opportunity to raise a wonderful family in an environment. So we start investing early and young. Also, it's important that we're investing in those young people around teaching them how to be leaders. You know, we need them to go back to these communities in rural areas and lead and be leaders. Step up, be run for county commission, run for the state house, because they need a voice. And we've learned in agriculture for a long time that if you're not telling your story, somebody else is telling it, and it's usually not right when they're telling it. So we want to find ways to help encourage those folks to do that. And so we start young. The labor market in agriculture is tough right now. We need an immigration policy that's not out there. Our leaders have not stepped up and put together an immigration policy that's good so that the farmers can plan for the future. We work through it the best we can. Technology is really important. We're using a lot of technology. In some of our large operations, there's a lot of robotics going in. Lots of robotics in greenhouses today, on dairy farms. You're going to see a lot of more technology. Certainly the equipment we're running out in the fields are running off satellite imagery, and so rural broadband is important to us as well. But labor's always been a challenge for agriculture and probably always will be. But I think the key to it is a strong immigration policy and investing in our young people.
I was actually going to applaud you. I did see on your website where you are offering scholarships to a number of students at different colleges, and I think over several states.
Yes, ma'am.
And you don't always see that on the website. So I really do applaud you guys. You really are investing in our future and building those leaders. The other thing that I was curious about, because I hear all these announcements about, I guess, regenerative agriculture, and that how it's still growing in the states, and I think I saw an announcement where we've reached over $100 billion industry. So you hear this good news, but then I hear you talk about the farmers. Can you kind of help us understand? So what are we hearing when we hear about the regenerative ag and all of the funding that's going there? Is that not helping with farmers, our traditional farmers?
It is helping. I think North Carolina, South Carolina are very, very diverse in agriculture. I mean, we're probably second to California and Texas. We're one of the most diverse areas in the country for crops that can be grown and different ways to do things. And agricultural space it's a big space that a lot of people can play in. So there's lots of sizes and scale that works. Regenerative is certainly an area that has gained a lot of popularity in the last few years. And I think it has a place to fit in. There's a place where it can grow. However, we still have to feed and clothe a lot of people in this country, and in, quite frankly, the world out of the United States. So North Carolina and South Carolina, 155 probably total billion-dollar industries. It's the largest industry in both states. We just hit that 103 mark in North Carolina last year or so, and we're excited to hit that part. So we're seeing agriculture grow, and the industries around agriculture grow, and that's creating jobs and opportunities for folks. However, we've got some headwinds in front of us. We're seeing, obviously the farmland is an issue. We're seeing commodity prices start to drop. Our input prices went sky high in the last few years, and they're not moving. So, the outlook for the next couple of years is looking pretty tight for our farmers to make it through.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got about 2 minutes left.
So your farmland is shrinking overall, but and it's number one obviously in both states, but you're seeing higher growth. So is that the yield that's growing?
It's efficiency. We're doing more with less. The technology is allowing us, science. I mean, we lean hard on our land grant universities, and to bring that science to the farmers. They're taking it, they're adopting it, they're able to produce more and get higher yields on less ground. And that efficiency is allowing us to grow even in a shrinking area of space.
Wow, that's awesome.
That's really, I'm so glad you brought this up, because I'm not sure most people realize that the total value of agriculture is growing in the States. I think people would know that the farmland is probably shrinking because of all the reasons we talk about. But I'm not sure it's widely known that actually agriculture is growing in both states.
1 in 6 jobs in North Carolina
Yes.
are tied to agriculture, about 1 in 11 in South Carolina. So it's a huge part of our state's economic infrastructure. And I think we will continue to see it be a very important part going forward.
So we've got just a few seconds left, actually, but just really quickly, can you just tell us what's the thing you're most excited about that you guys are doing this year in 2024?
Oh, I think the investments we're making into young leadership it excites me. Anytime I get around young people and get to invest in young people, it's awesome. We do that with our young farmers. We bring young farmers in and provide them opportunities to learn how to be leaders and grow their operations and get prepared to take over as we see a transfer of ownership as the older generation moves forward. So working with our young people always excites me and gets me excited to go to work every day.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. Well, thanks to all of you for joining us today, Vicki, Lee, and Carl. It was so nice to meet you, and welcome to the show for the first time. And it's great to talk about both the urban and rural parts of the state. And we hope you'll join us next time here on Carolina Business Review.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, Sunoco, High Point University, Colonial Life, and by viewers like you. Thank you. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.